I'm proud of our excellent Yelp reviews complimenting our bedside manner and my parents' talent for curing a lifetime of buyer's regret. Still, it's not my calling. The accolades don't stop me from thinking, just one more summer, just one more sale. So that is Emma Lewis, and she's given the reins, and I'm going to read a little passage where she's actually given the reins at a birthday dinner by her parents. But when I started the book, I don't outline. I've never outlined any of my books. So I didn't know Emma, and I go to estate sales. Who goes to estate sales?
Actually, I would like that one.
Yes. And I went to an estate sale in the Hudson Valley, and I bought some things that I really loved. Not big things, not grandfather clock. It was, particularly beautiful painted plate that I put hors d'oeuvres on. And then and then 2 soup bowls, and another one was a sort of serving bowl. And I found a mug, a coffee mug, and it was from the Forward. It was originally a Yiddish newspaper and now English, but Jewish. And I bought it, and I drink from it, and it's, one of my favorites. And I started sort of thinking about, might it be nice to write a novel where someone goes to an estate sale or someone runs estate sales and feels some relationship with the dead woman that you'll never meet. But so I thought I gave that about 5 minutes thought. And I thought, but it's only going to be some cliche. It's going to be a long-lost relative, a birth father, a birth mother, something 23andMe. So I discarded that, and I just started writing about Emma. She's had this sort of rootless life since she graduated from college. This takes place in a town in western Massachusetts, very thinly disguised Northampton, where I live. Like, so thinly disguised that I've named all the other real towns surrounding. Agawam, the Peter Pan bus line, Big Buy supermarkets. But I wanted to keep it Harrow because my second novel was set also in Northampton called Harrow. So I thought, well, someday will write a paper. I had Harrow in 3 of my books. It's also in The Parents in Misdemeanor Live There. So this is the part where, her parents, and it's actually her father who was widowed when Emma was 6 and married the very nice neighbor Beth, who appropriately came over to the chocolate cake. That, not a casserole, a chocolate cake. And they married when Emma was 8, and she's a very loving stepmother. So this is sort of mid-chapter, but we can get right down to it. Beth and my dad announced with some ceremony at my 32nd birthday dinner that they were looking at a townhouse in Buzzards Bay. Winters are milder on the Cape, said my dad, and I might get a little dingy. I asked what looking at a townhouse meant. As a rental property, can't be for summers, could it? Finders keepers, high season, surely not a full-time move, as in retirement. That's where you come in, Beth said, raising her champagne flute, the logical heir to the throne. They were asking at this shockingly early juncture, how would I like to take over? Finders keepers was mine if I wanted it. I didn't want it. I'd helped out because I had to. I wouldn't be good at wooing or charming clients. I wasn't vivacious Beth or genial John Paul. Who retires the second they turn 65? They were busy and healthy. Buzzards Bay, a dinghy. They were Harrowites to the core, or so I thought. You'd walk away from Finders? Isn't it your baby or nest egg, I asked. No, said Beth, it was your college fund. It may seem out of the blue, but we've always loved the Cape. And my back is telling me no more hoisting sofas onto people's trucks said my dad.
Alex,
And no more Sunday nights leaving the property, air quotes, broom clean. I hope I never have to hear that expression again, said Beth. I said, what about me though? I'd be going for broom clean. I'd be hosting sofas onto trucks, beds for people who should have brought along their beefy sons. Sweetheart, at 32, you'll be the CEO of one of Harrow's most beloved homegrown businesses. You'd be ready right out of the gate, no training needed, said Beth. And you won't have a gap on your resume between school, J. Crew, Nordstrom Rack, and whatever's next. You keep family and family business, said my dad. No small matter. And if you couldn't swing the taxes, I left out a card. Dad and Beth exchanged a look that I recognized as, should I tell her or should you? It was my dad who delivered the bombshell. You'll stop paying rent and move home. No, wait, listen, home, but without the stigma. You wouldn't be a boomeranging adult child if we're no longer under the same roof. Huh, right? And if you couldn't swing the taxes, the utilities, the fuel, the upkeep, we have a solution. I was shaking my head, thinking their solution was throwing more cash at my unprofitable lifestyle. I said, if you mean helping out once again, there's only so much. But my dad was saying, with 3 bedrooms, and as far as we've gleaned, no boyfriend / partner / companion on the horizon, why not a boarder? Not a roommate in the traditional sense, not someone to socialize and share meals with, but someone who merely rents a room. You'd take the master bedroom, and he'd get your old room, and would keep to himself, added Dad. Himself, I repeated. Of course they had someone in mind, practically lined up. Frank Crowley, my old algebra teacher, and one of my dad's colleagues who I've known my whole life, recently widowed, but, they assured me, coping remarkably well. Recently widowed told only half the tale. His wife had died instantly and famously on the golf course about a year ago, struck by lightning, front page news for days. He would not be a gloomy presence, Beth continued. He just wants a rule of his own. So that's Frank Crowley, and I didn't know him either. And so she agrees, she doesn't give in, but she says, they say, well, how about if you just have breakfast with him? And so they meet, and, as soon as he walks in, and, there he is, he sort of has the same crew cut he had when he was coaching, the boys and the girls. And he also, it's got a windbreaker on. And anyway, it's very, very sweet man. And so, I skipped right. I got the side part. So I'm sorry. Frank. Oh, so Frank has moved in because that went very well. Very sweet. Okay. I knew almost immediately that landladyhood was working. On day 1, Frank corrected the time of my coffee maker and programmed it to brew 4 cups at 6:30 every morning. He took the trash and recycling bins to the curb the first Wednesday he was in residence, noticed what needed tightening or oiling, and performed tasks unknown to me, such as emptying the crumbs collected at the bottom of the toaster. One evening he came downstairs, found me watching The Bachelorette in the den, and said the Sox were losing by 10 runs in the 8th inning, too painful to watch. Did I have a minute? There was something important he wanted to discuss with me. I paused my show, surprising myself by feeling worried. Was our arrangement not working out? No, it was this. He was asking my permission to get something that had been unattainable when Ginger was alive. Could he get a dog? Unattainable why, I asked. Was she allergic? No, he said sadly. She didn't like dogs. She was afraid they'd shed. I told him I'd always wanted a dog too. He said he'd go to the pound. Maybe there would be an older dog whose owner had died, fully trained. One day later, enter a squat little girl, part pit bull, part basset hound.
You still put it out.
Brindled in brown and gold. She was orphaned of indeterminate age, maybe 2, maybe 3 years old, guessed the vet, and instantly in love with Frank, and to a slightly less ecstatic degree, me. She'd been named Sad Eyes at the shelter, which Frank softened to a relatable long eye, Ivy. We placed one dog bed, a fleece-lined cave that looked like a pita pocket, in the kitchen, and another halfway between our 2 bedrooms. She stopped crying as soon as she was permitted sleepovers in Frank's room. He took on more chores around the house, slowly, as if too many would be overstepping some line. Vacuuming, did I mind? I announced that I was cutting his rent by $25 a week. How clean and orderly the house had become since he moved in. But when the first check came, it was for the full agreed-upon $500. I asked, waving the check, "Did you forget?" It was my own fault. I had a bad habit of yelping when I opened bills, electric, gas, the whoppers from the town for real estate and school taxes. Heading out the door, which Ivy, both of them smiling, or so it seemed, he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I needed to make a gesture. I knew a present would embarrass him unless it could masquerade as something for the house. I looked around the kitchen. The Mr. Coffee had arrived with Beth when she and Dad married, and the soup he made for Ivy simmered for hours. After research online, I ordered the Rolls-Royce of pressure cookers and a coffee maker that boasted hot and cold foam technology. It needed whole beans, so I signed us up for a subscription to a coffee roaster in Seattle, starting with 2 pounds of a big seller with low acidity and heady notes of vanilla. So let me see. Am I reading too much?
No.
Okay, because I'd love to introduce Luke, because if you've read other books of mine, you know there's always a happy ending. And sometimes, well, you know, all of Shakespeare's comedies end with weddings. I'm not saying, but just saying. Just academic note there. So this, now Frank has been helping out. It starts with him, she's heading off and she's saying, "Oh, this place I'm going to, it's awful. It smells like kitty litter and I can't even open a window." So he says, "You know, why don't I come?" And he's really good at it. First of all, he was a math teacher, so he, you know, can add the sales tax without having to use without having to use calculator. Thank you. And he's recognized some things that she missed low priced because he recognized what they were. So and he won't take any pay for that either. He's delighted to help. So midweek, following a middling sale on Fairgrove, the doorbell startled me awake. Who'd be visiting at 8:30? Hearing muted but companionable sounding exchanges, I knew that Frank was up and tending to it. A friend of his, I figured, no need to rush downstairs. I dressed, brushed hair, and went down and found a uniformed policeman seated at the kitchen table. Unsmiling, he half rose, nodded formally, sat down. As one of Harrow's 3 police officers, Luke Winooski was known by all. Everyone, including me, had gone to school with a Winooski sibling or cousin. But this wasn't the Luke I'd graduated with. Once a chubby redhead who played drums in the HHS orchestra and marching band, he'd returned from the police academy and a decade on the Worcester force, fit and nearly unrecognizable. "What's up?" I asked, with an involuntary check of his left hand. "It isn't social, I'm afraid," Frank explained. "Chief Winooski is here on police business." Was it about Frank, I wondered? Surely not anything that would make me wonder how clueless I'd been to open my door to a criminal. "Does he need a lawyer?" I asked. Luke smiled, a fleeting relief, except that he was now saying, "No, but you might." "Emma," said Frank, "we weren't supposed to be selling alcohol at the Moriarty's." "What alcohol?" "The Spumante," said Frank. Luke added, "and reportedly a bottle of peach wine." "That's what brought you here? A bottle of peach wine?" "You need a license to sell alcohol," he said. Taking issue with sell, I explained how we practically gave it away. I said we designed groupings made maybe with wine glasses, a corkscrew, an apron. Once in a while, if I found an unopened bottle. "Did someone buy this grouping?" Luke asked. I looked at Comptroller Frank, who nodded. "You need a license to sell beer and alcohol," Luke repeated. "We got a complaint." I asked if it was a local, state, or federal crime. "It's a town ordinance," he said. "Not my call." After a few moments, Luke asked, a new color behind his freckles, "How long have you two been living together?" Frank raised his hand in the manner of, "Full stop, let me answer that. I'm a boarder here. Emma's father and I were colleagues and friends. Of course, you know, Ginger died. And to me, Ginger's caddy called 911. An ambulance came, and so did Luke." "I missed that," I said. "I was living in Framingham at the time." "You and Luke were in the same class at HHS, said Frank. "Surely you knew that." I said, "I did, of course." "And he moved back to replace Chief Mankoff. Lucky for us all." "Lucky," I repeated. Frank glanced at Luke. "I'll leave it at bent cop. Is that unfair?" "We'll leave it at he had a heart attack," said Luke. Then to me, "You need to get your van inspected. Your sticker expired at the end of last month." I said I'd take care of that today. "Thanks for noticing." Then, hoping to sound enthusiastic about the municipality that employed him, I said, "It's nice being back. As you obviously know, I took over the family business." "She's introduced a lot of new features," said Frank. Finally, a laugh from Luke. "So I've heard."
They were two.
So that is Luke, who is the absolute opposite of the crooked Manny Mankoff, who was pretty much, given an ultimatum that he had to leave. So he, as these things happen, they said he had a heart attack and to move to Florida, in fact, where he took a painting. But we hear from him again. So what happens pretty early in the book is someone, in fact, Luke's mother, tells Frank that she's noticed a for sale sign in front of a very large house on Harrow's Cautious Street. And so Emma, doing due diligence, thinks she'll call the owner because if it sells, maybe they want to have an estate sale. So the first call is kind of a disaster because it's a 413 Western Mass area code where this is, but Lois Mankoff, yes, the ex-wife of the Cricketop, is now in California, so she wakes her up. And, that conversation ends with Lois, the homeowner, saying, "What's your commission?" And Emma tells her, 40%, the going rate. I checked that, that's the going rate. And she hangs up on her. So then, Emma tells Frank over breakfast that didn't work out. He said, "Well, wait a minute, you should counter." So she, calls her back a day later, and they negotiate. And I think they ended with, 35%, but that is not important to the plot. So this is sort of the important phone call where Emma is on a phone call with Lois on speakerphone, and her daughter Vanessa, who's helping out. Vanessa's probably 40, I don't name it exactly, 40, 45. So a request, or was it a test, put forth by daughter Vanessa in the promised determinative phone call. We'd need you to burn the contents of the file cabinet in the bow parlor. The bow parlor? Burn? I dealt with plenty of file cabinets, one of the reasons I owned a Dolly's, but I'd never been asked to set fire to anyone's possessions. I assume you've gone through this paperwork and now there's nothing valuable left behind? I asked. When my question met with silence, I continued. I mean, things like birth certificates, insurance policies, wills. I found savings bonds that the clients had never cashed. Vanessa asked, is burning things such a big deal? Hoping this would be all the disincentive required, I said, I don't have a fireplace or a wood stove, and considering the town's outdoor burn bans, I'm afraid it is a big deal. Though I could surely find a way to burn unwanted papers, the task had a dodgy ring to it. Or was it Lois herself who was giving me a law-breaking vibe? What if it was evidence? What if her ex used his home file cabinet for confidential Harrow police files? What if destroying the files meant I was perverting the course of justice? Couldn't you just lock up the file cabinet? It's as easy as taping a sign on it that says, not for sale, do not open. Lois said, yes, forget we asked. And to her daughter, tell her what we were famous for. What did we make our reputation on? Discretion, said Vanessa. Is she still on? Lois asked her daughter. I might have volunteered to hang up so they could talk freely, but I was too enthralled to withdraw. Please know that everything we've discussed is off the record, I said. Don't go overboard, said Lois. Use whatever will help bring in the most customers. I'm proud of my worker bees. I loved every single one. Beauty and brains, and it went both ways. Men of the highest caliber. It was the best job ever. At my phoniest and most flattering, I answered, wow, how many of us can say that? It's inspiring. Lois said, I don't have a college degree. I didn't have anything to put on a resume besides housewife, mother, hostess. These were the happiest years of my life. Happiest? As in happiest hooker? Why not ask at this point? Were you one of these worker bees? As a demi-mondaine? Ha, thank you, but no. What did that leave? Were you the madam? And then, as if it were the most logical and obvious job one could perform at a brothel, Lois Mankoff said proudly, I was the house mother.
Cool.
So that's the big potential sale. And of course, there are complications, and I think that's enough reading. I can, well, of course, you can raise your hand and ask me anything about the writing. As I said, I don't outline. When I pass the book in, then I go over it, I revise and revise and revise dozens of times, one chapter at a time. I revise and revise, and then I send that chapter to Stacy Schiff, who is the famous biographer. Her newest book was Samuel Adams, and she wrote Cleopatra and the Witches, and a great improvisation about Ben Franklin that was made into a Apple TV series that was great with Michael Douglas. Anyway, Stacy was my first editor, and she still reads my chapters, and I read hers, luckily. So I revise. So I sent it to my editor, and I thought, well, it's really polished, but I was a little worried that the Luke and Emma romance had possibly unfolded a little too easily, that there weren't any hurdles. But I didn't want it to be like, the three act movies that are, romantic comedies, and they meet and you get your hopes up, and then for whatever reason, complications, and they break up, and then the last third of the movie. So I didn't want to do that. So I thought, well, what could I do? So I thought, well, Luke moved here from Worcester, where he was there for 10 years, and Worcester from Harrow, Northampton is about an hour away. And so I'll give him maybe a girlfriend there. Maybe she'll hear that and consider him off limits, even if that wasn't true. So I thought, well, I know she can't just keep coming across the chief of police. So I invented a 15th high school reunion committee. And they were both recruited because he's kind of a celebrity in town, and he's the chief of police. And Emma was invited just because she was walking Ivy in the park and ran into the chairman of the committee. Plus, they figured, she's a businesswoman. She might have a good mailing list or something like that. So I invented a reunion committee that had meetings. And the meetings, the first one, Emma doesn't want to sit next to him. And then, when he's a little friendlier, then she doesn't know why. So I developed it, and there's several of these meetings, and each one, by the third or fourth meeting, things have happened, if you know what I mean. Things have happened, but they don't want the committee to know, because the committee would put it in, class notes. So that's kind of the way I write, which is, and my editor was really happy with that. And let me see, what would you like me to talk about, Al's? Process. People always want to hear about process. Mm-hmm. So, a question.
So what happens to the process?
Process.
So I just use a line that your work, your characters or days or something. So to speak, as you're writing, and then it expires.
Yes.
So that's one thing. So then, the stories seem to always end happily, but also there's a bit of serendipity in the endings. Do you know what that serendipitous then best, and you reverse engineer?
No.
Come in prose with the story.
No. If something serendipitous happens, it just happens, sort of flies into my head. An example of that is with Misdemeanor, which is the yellow book over there. That's my last novel. I was writing the first chapter and really doing a crappy job on the opening. Again, I had this woman, and someone had offered her a kind of freelance job. And I suddenly think and write for the end of the chapter that would work well because she was under house arrest. And I hadn't seen that coming. And then, I thought, I think I could have a little fun with that house arrest. And so and then I borrowed my own apartment building in New York, and he's under house arrest. I give it a different name. But, the serendipity, serendipity's okay. I avoid coincidences. So, coincidences in fiction are not, it's not the gods that put it in there. It's the author that makes it happen. And so I avoid coincidences. But the process is I try to write 500 words a day. And if it comes a little too easy, dialogue is the easiest part for me. And I have to push myself to add, what is she wearing? What is, what's in the room, or what are they sitting on? What's on the table? All that stuff. So the description, I don't like too much description because I don't like to read too much description. So I have Stacy, when she was my editor for my first two books, in one margin, back in the day when it was on paper, she wrote, it was people sitting at a table and eating, and she wrote in the margin, "Could someone here please pass the potatoes?" And I have to think about that all the time. So if I write 500 words and it's dialogue and it comes too quickly and it's 9:30 in the morning, then I say, you should, to myself, try for 750, and then maybe try for 1,000 if you still have some words on this topic. So that's, yes.
Do you ever get writer's block?
Do I ever get writer's block? I don't like to recognize that. I got, what I do is, if I feel stuck, I had my first teacher, his name was Arthur Edelstein. I was 28, and I signed up for an adult ed writer's workshop, beginning writer's workshop at Brandeis. I was living in Newton at the time, and, like so scared. But I went because I had paid $40. Yes, yeah, I paid $40 for this. So I went, and on the topic, one of his best pieces of advice was prepare to write badly. So with that in mind, I think, it's time to start a new chapter. What's Emma going to do today? So I write, I just write anything. Because that can usually can lead to some action, something's going to happen. And I had some really other very good advice from, not personally, but I'm sure some of you know of or read Fay Weldon, the British. She wrote, her most famous book is The Loves and Lives of a She-Devil. And I read an interview with her a friend brought it back, knowing that I was a Fay Weldon fan, brought me back an interview with her. And she talked about teaching, and that a student would say, I can't write, I get writer's block, I'm stuck. So Fay Weldon would say to them, well, no, it's not you. It's the work, which is about the worst thing the writer wants to hear. But then she said, it maybe needs cutting, or maybe it's time to add another character. And I remember when I read that, I was writing Good Riddance, which is over there too. I was writing Good Riddance. So I added like a neighbor across the hall. And I add characters maybe a little too easily. So I don't like to recognize what feels like, stuck. And I once I taught a 2-week summer workshop at Bennington College for a couple of summers in a row. And I interviewed my fellow teachers, what do you do when you get stuck? So I could tell my students who were asking. And maybe the best advice I ever got, I think it was Carol Edgarian, a writer, novelist, who said, go back to the truest line. And that is really helpful, because the truest line, is usually sort of the best line you wrote. And then after that, maybe it's just been, you're just letting yourself talk or meandering. So go back to the truest line is just about the best advice I ever got. So, yes.
How do you give titles to your book? Because every Tom, Dick, and Harry doesn't flow from a story. It was a white story. I read.
Oh, you read it? Yes. Well, it's a line from the book.
It is a line.
It's a line from the book. And Vanessa, you met Vanessa, and she's talking about, it's a bed and breakfast. It's a bed and breakfast that's a cover for a brothel, but they're actually doing both at the same time. But Vanessa's explaining to Emma on her first visit that, we can tell who's calling about what. Because if someone calls and they're talking about like handicap access, we know they want to stay over a bed and breakfast. But if they call and say, Greg from Greenwich sent me, and then she said, we don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry. So I thought, Tom, Dick, and Harry. So I liked that, and I don't write titles down, because if you can't remember it, it's not a good title. So if I think of a title, and I wake up in the morning and I can't remember it, I think, okay, that won't do. So I tried it out on Stacy, my first reader, and I think next my agent, and then my editor, and everybody liked it. And it doesn't totally fit, but it worked through in a line of mud outside these house. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Where did you go? What led you to become a writer?
Oh, I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts. Born in, well, I know. You know.
Well, we Massachusetts people.
Oh, where?
Marblehead.
I know Marblehead. Oh, 1950. Of course. You're right. Yeah, my college roommate was from Marblehead. Shelley Goldenberg.
Yeah.
Did you know Michael Michelson or Alice Michelson, doctors? They were my cousin.
That brings up that.
Yeah, Michael is my cousin. Okay, that's not bad. Yeah. I forget the question. What was the question?
Get the question.
Grew up in Lowell. You know, I always, English was always my favorite topic. In college, I would write, sort of humorous essays for the school newspaper, and I had writing jobs. I majored in publications. I went to Simmons in Boston. Okay, that's enough, ladies. So I'm trying to tell you a teacher in this.
No, we were trying to think of who we knew that went to Smith.
Oh, yeah, no, it won't matter because I taught, to like the 2012.
Simmons. So the wife at Simmons. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Is that what you said?
I went to Simmons, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm sorry. That's all right. That's all right. So, I always had various writing jobs, but they were, the job I had when I took that writing class at Brandeis at night was for the Mass Teachers Association, which might be why, Frank and John Paul were father of teachers. And so I was doing nonfiction. And then I just started thinking in terms of, I hear something about a person's life and I think, that could be a story. Not that I want to borrow people's lives. I did that once. I can tell you about that. Got into trouble. So I took the course, Brandeis. I was 28, and I had my first story published when I was 30. And was published in Yankee magazine, and then my second story was published in Yankee magazine, and eventually I had enough stories and I got an agent, and then that led to the first book was a short story collection at Viking, which is Stacy Schiff was my editor. She was 25 years old.
Yes.
Yes.
How do you come up with the names for your characters?
Oh, that's a good question. With 50 novels, I made a list. I sometimes think, I wonder if like a high school student could kind of skim my books and write down the names of people so I didn't reuse names, because it's a lot of names to dream up. So I would say I have a baby naming dictionary, and sometimes I just look, when I'm looking for a surname, I just look over at my desk is here and there's a bookcase over there, and I look at names of whatever authors, and sometimes I'll Google Irish last names, Jewish last names, whatever else, first names. So I know I had never had an Emma, so I named her Emma. And how are you doing? Am I going on too long? Okay. Coincidentally, speaking of non-coincidences, but I was asked, Simon & Schuster, I'm with Harper, but Simon & Schuster, I have a good friend who's an editor there, and she's doing an anthology, and it's called Ladies in Waiting, and she's asked about a dozen different writers, authors, fiction writers, to write a story about a minor character in any Jane Austen novel. So the subtitle is, Jane Austen's minor characters. So I chose Emma after the fact, and I wrote a story about Miss Bates, the unfortunate Miss Bates. who's a destiny. So anyway, that's next November. Ladies in Waiting. Yes.
Are you going to be doing any more political poetry?
I'm not. You know, I got sick of that. That was about 5. I did it for 2 campaigns, 2008 and 2012. And, you know, it just got to be, I got sick of it. I wake up in the morning and I get my rhyming dictionary and I have to read the news. And it was just sort of, I should be writing and not this. So, and you know, the book was published, Tweet Land of Liberty. So that was enough. And now, of course, I get, not of course, but I get out and I do spelling bee and Wordle and connections. And that was the time that I would devote to coming up with rhyming political doing. So, yes. So, yes.
What do you like to read? What types of books?
Oh, I like, I love memoir biography. I always have this is a fairly recent thing, no, not so recent, last 3 or 4 years, I always have an audiobook going. Mm-hmm. So I'm always, if I'm cooking, emptying the dishwasher, whatever, I'm walking, and I go to sleep listening to an audiobook, which actually why nonfiction works better, because if I fall asleep, which I always do, I can find my place better when it's nonfiction. So that, but I like with fiction, I like, you know, smart and witty novels. So, and also, I always like, after the fact, I had I've lost 3 wonderful friends who died years apart. But the first one was Carol Shields, Canadian author. She wrote The Stone Diaries, for which she won the Pulitzer Prize. And I found her because I reviewed a book of hers called The Republic of Love. I reviewed it for the New York Times, and I loved it so much, and we eventually met. And she had stage 4 breast cancer, and anyway, but I told her that whenever anyone asks, like, what you read, I would say Carol Shields. And then I lost Anita Shreve, who was one of my best friends. So I always say Anita Shreve. And then a lesser-known novelist, but truly my best bosom buddy that I met in writing group at Brandeis, Mamie Medwed, who we had, she died right after she died in 2021, right after her 6th novel came out. And she writes, romantic comedy, very smart, very, very, very smart, very witty.
Is it?
So, and I'll be signing,
It's just a comment. I mean, in addition to your novels, I've also really enjoyed the articles that you run for your magazine.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially the ones that, includes the change in dress.
Right.
So I just always felt that I was becoming my mother and becoming this old funny daddy, and it was such a pleasure to hear that I'm not the only one.
I made new ideas. I have kind of a standing invitation. It's a section in AARP magazine called This Is 70. And so I've done 3. And I sort of have an open invitation, but we're running out of material. But that is hugely read. Hugely read. I hear from all over when something. So I don't want to, that people start asking mercy questions if I stand that's too long. So, but you can ask me anything because I'll be over there. And, good for the bookstore, right? Support your local independent bookstore. You actually have it on 1 year and 6 months off.